In this episode, I catch up with MHSAA Executive Director Mark Ewell as winter sports wrap up and spring athletics get underway. We talk about how the winter season went, what schools can look forward to this spring, including the debut of boys volleyball as a new MHSAA tournament sport, and a few other topics that have generated recent headlines. Mark helps unpack the expansion of personal branding opportunities for high school athletes and the ongoing conversation around separating public and private schools in postseason play. If you want a behind-the-scenes look at how these decisions are made and what they mean for schools, be sure to check it out. So enjoy your ride to or from school, your run on the treadmill, or however you like to listen, because another MASSP podcast episode starts now. All right, well, we are back again. Mark, you are no stranger to the MASSP podcast, so thank you so much for finding time as we are getting ready to transition seasons for making the time to talk today. Glad to have you.
You bet, Ryan. Great to be back with you.
Awesome. So I know we typically kind of are able to check in throughout the year a couple different times as certain seasons are wrapping up, new ones are beginning. This time, the winter season is coming to a close. And so would just love to know from your perspective, how did the winter season sports schedule go? Anything just noteworthy that you'd like to share as some of those sports are continuing to wrap up?
So our winter sport that finished first actually had its best season in about a decade, and that was downhill skiing. With winter returning this year, this was the toughest winter, and I think the further north that you go, I mean, talk to the folks in the Marquette area, the amount of snow they got this year. I know we've had lots of schools that have struggled really back in the month of January with the cold. But I will tell you, downhill skiing had its best weather that they've had in a decade. So the high school ski season went great. It's really been really a very straightforward winter. This is really the first year of kind of that condensed calendar where our winter sports are really concluding a week earlier than what they have. That was to really get winter sports done before a lot of schools were starting their spring break weeks. Those have continually moved earlier with state testing right away in April. Districts wanting to get kids back in the building for at least a week before testing. So spring breaks were moving earlier. So we got really good feedback this year on the calendar. And, here in another week and a half, winter will be done. Spring sports just started. We're taping this on Tuesday, March 10th. And, yesterday, the first day of spring sports, it was 70 degrees in a lot of parts of our state. So hopefully we'll have a good, as tough as the winter was weather-wise, we're hoping that coin will turn here for the spring and have some good weather, and we'll finish out really what's been a really good and solid school year.
Absolutely. From a parent perspective, going through the winter season with my own kids, it didn't seem any more condensed than just what the doldrums of what the winter season normally is, right? And so I didn't notice a difference, and so that's good to hear. So as we are moving into the spring season, what excites you about what's in store for the spring then?
So in the fall, we had the debut of girls field hockey and crowned our first champion. And we're really excited here in the 101st year of the MHSAA that our second new sport that we added, boys volleyball, will make its debut as an MHSAA tournament sport this spring. We've got about 130 schools that are going to play volleyball in the inaugural season, which is giving us enough schools to split that into two divisions. So we'll have two champions. That tournament will finish in the exact same place where the girls do, Kellogg Arena in Battle Creek. It's really a nice setup. The arena keeps getting better and better, and the great thing for teams and schools is there's a hotel attached. So the teams that do qualify for the semifinals and then the finals on the following day, it really a good experience for those kids and communities. So excited about boys volleyball coming onto the scene, along with our other spring sports. And again, weather really drives spring. I know every administrator, their lives are so much easier when we get good spring weather. So hopefully that warm weather will get here quick and stay, and we'll have a good spring.
That's exciting to hear. I knew obviously boys volleyball was coming on this season, but I was curious, and you answered it, how many schools you had. So that really does fill out a nice full playoff bracket, right, for both divisions, which I know is always the goal, right, to be able to have a competitive bracket to
It
run.
is. So we don't have enough schools yet where we have to start with districts, but a lot of our sports, their first level of the tournament is at the regional level. And so volleyball will go, we'll start at the regional level, and then that will finish obviously with the four teams in each division for the semis, and then obviously two in each for the finals. But excited. I think just about every regional will have 7 or 8 teams, which makes for a really nice tournament.
Yep.
And given lots of flexibility for those dates as well, because Ryan, you and I both know what school calendars look like,
Yep.
especially when you get into the month of May and June with exams and AP testing and college board testing and all of the things that come with the end of the school year, trying to give our schools as much flexibility as possible.
That's great. Well, I'm excited to see how that will turn out, and we'll be able to check in with you hopefully next fall and give us an update. So one topic that really generated a lot of news, it seemed like, at least maybe on social media, and I kind of did an eye roll there, but was the news that the Rep Council approved the expansion of the personal branding activities. And I know a lot of people just associate that, right or wrong, if that's the same as NIL, the name, image, and likeness that you hear at the college level. So for those who just maybe read the headline and nothing else, can you just walk us through kind of what the news is, what that actually means for our high school student athletes here in Michigan, and just some of the things, I guess, really behind the scenes that maybe people might not understand what was already happening, what's changed, that sort of thing.
Sure. So we've kept a very close eye on what was happening all over the country, really since NIL has become a thing at the college level. Any administrator who's been at one of our fall update meetings the last 3 years has heard me talk about this topic because back in 2023, our House of Representatives had actually proposed a bill that would have mandated us to allow NIL opportunities at the high school level. It passed our House. It never was taken up in the Senate and obviously never passed. But it was really through that conversation around the proposed state law in 23 and 24 that the thing we heard back loud and clear from our schools is, you know what, if we have to go down this road, we can live with individual opportunities for individual kids. What we cannot live with are schools being involved in any kind of group activity like what you see at the college level with collectives or booster clubs or those kinds of things. So we kind of came into this with really that those goals pretty clearly spelled out. What was becoming harder, Ryan, was the fact that when we adopted this back in January, we became the 47th state to allow this kind of activity at the college or at the high school level. So I think folks can read between the lines and say that we were not eager to do this, certainly. But in doing a lot of court watching around the country, whenever a legal challenge was made to kind of what I'll just call traditional amateurism rules, the rules were losing. Courts universally around the country were siding with students and their ability in a capitalistic society to be able to make some money with their personal brand. And so with the threat of litigation being there, and by the way, us old timers can remember, it's not safe ground when you're one of only 2 or 3 states not doing something. We can think back to 20 plus years ago when many of our sports seasons had to change. Specifically girls basketball was in the fall, volleyball was in the winter. We were one of the very few states that were different that way. And again, that did not play out well for us in terms of the legal landscape. So the nice thing about being 47th is you had 46 other experiences to learn from. What we found is there's really going to be 3 kinds of kids that are going to have these opportunities. The first is it's going to be the very, very high level national type recruit in certain sports at certain positions. Bryce Underwood, who's currently playing quarterback at the University of Michigan, when he was a high school athlete, he would be the kind of kid to have lots of these opportunities. High profile, nationally ranked recruit at the quarterback spot. Unfortunately, if my son played Division I football but was an inside linebacker, not so much. So it's certain sports, certain positions. The second groups of kids are actually the elite level, what I'll call Olympic or individual sport kids. That kid who's an elite runner, an elite tennis player, an elite golfer, to where one of the running shoe companies or in golf, one of the equipment brands would see a standout kind of generational type kid and say, you know what, that's an individual who has some marketability and we want to pair with that student. And then the third group of kids, and it's really regardless of your athletic ability, it's kids who are really good with social media. Whether it's their cleverness, how they post, what they post about, how they've kind of built their voice, their online brand. Companies and businesses are going to want to pair with them and see if those relationships work. In each of those three categories, traditional amateurism rules would have said you can't do that because in kind of those old rules, if you're an athlete, you can't do anything connected, even somewhat superficially connected to the fact that you're an athlete. So what can kids do? We've really tried to couch this with student employment. NIL at the college level is kids basically getting bags of cash. Well, at the high school level, if you want to make money based on your personal brand, you've got to provide a service, and in return, you can see some of that compensation. So if somebody wants to hire you for an appearance, an autograph session, a photo shoot, those are now all permissible. If a student wants to partner with a brand, you see a lot, and I don't want to say a lot, and I'll get to the numbers here in a second, but you'll see some kids that partner with a clothing line. And what they'll do is they'll post about this company and the really cool kind of sweatshirts that they have. And here's the link if you want to buy one of these sweatshirts. And then in return, I get 5% on every sweatshirt that's bought. That's a fairly typical personal branding activity that's gone on at both the college level, and we're seeing a little bit of that at the high school level. And obviously, as a social media influencer. So we're recording this on March 10th. And so the rule has been around almost, we're nearing the 2-month spot. And I can tell you that we've had just over 50 deals reported to us, Ryan, with the disclosure process, and almost none of them involve money. Let me repeat that. Almost none of them involve money. It's local businesses who have wanted to partner with a student. And basically, we've had 4 kids that have been given a personal branding deal by a local donut company. And what these kids do is they post twice a week about the donut shop on their social media. And then each time they do that, they get a $10 gift card. So they're getting donuts. I wouldn't call that real money.
Yeah.
We've got a young man here in the Lansing area, standout basketball player. And there's a really unique fish place here in town. And you can go in and buy the combo meal with this young man's name attached to it. It's really kind of a pretty slick marketing. And then all that he's getting from this PBA deal is he can go in and he's able to get, I think it's 2 or 3 of his combo meals a week. So this whole concept, back to when this got announced, a lot of people didn't read beyond the headline, and they just assumed, well, NIL, college level, bags of cash, that's what this is going to look like, and that simply isn't the case. As I mentioned, we were 47th. North Carolina is a state very similar to us. They've actually got about 1 million more people, and they've kept really good data. And what they found is that in North Carolina, in the 3 years of PBA or NIL, 1 out of about 770 high school students have had some sort of a deal. So that's less than 1%. And the average value of those deals in North Carolina has been right around $100. Yeah. So of the 60 or so that we've approved so far, almost none of them involve money or cash. They're all kind of local in lieu of, you get some product. We had some kids with the social media, the sweatshirts and some of that apparel that we've seen. And so really the process has been very straightforward. Where I'll kind of wrap up with this is there is a clear separation, or think of it as a brick wall between kids with these individual opportunities and schools. That's school facilities, that's school uniforms, that's anything connected with the intellectual property of the school. Those are all prohibited, as well as any school personnel being involved in this. Again, it should be kids on their own connecting with brands or businesses that want to hire them for a service, and they're able to do so. We've really done, I think, a pretty good job. If you go to our website, mhsaa.com/NIL, that takes you to a landing page. So we've put together about a 14-minute video that's geared specifically towards students and parents. So a lot of our schools are sharing that link. I know a lot of our schools who have just had some spring parent meetings have actually showed that at their meeting, because again, everybody hears NIL, don't read beyond the headline, and we're thinking there's all this cash out there. NIL happens at the college level because at the major college level, it's $1 billion industry run by millionaire coaches and administrators. And I think it's very plausible at that level that students who are part of that $1 billion economic enterprise should get a piece of the action. That is not the case here at the high school level. Ryan, as you know, our athletic departments are trying to break even, and there is no piece of the economic action in this case for students. And that's why I think we really have seen the very small local type deals that we've seen so far. And we'll just, again, with the disclosure process, every deal, regardless of dollar number, has to be disclosed to us. So we're actually getting really, really good data on what's out there, not just the deals that come in, but we have a staff member who is all over this and really, really checks social media closely every day for anything that's NIL or PBA with Michigan. We're cross-checking that with what's come in. And so again, I know there was, some real heartburn when this first happened, but the reality is it's really been quite pedestrian.
Well, thank you for explaining that and clearing that up. And that's exactly why, I wanted to ask that question. I knew there was quite a few that already had these types of structures in place, different states, but I had no idea it was 47.
Yep. So we were very late to the party. This is something, and it was, we were going to get there if we had to. And, there was a fairly high profile lawsuit in Ohio earlier in the fall. Some of those litigation clouds were beginning to form here. And the other key to this, Ryan, is, some would say, well, you should have fought this. If this isn't something that you really wanted to do, well, you should have stood up and fought this. Well, the risk that you run is then when you get sued, what you're now gambling on is you might end up with a rule or a regulation that you have no control over. That's going to get forced on you by a judge, by a court. Maybe it then gets kicked to the legislature. So I guess at the end of the day, and what our board really felt is, hey, if we're going to have to end up here eventually, then let's be the ones with the pen in our hand to kind of control our own destiny and fate here of really creating a rule and a regulation that we can live with. And that's what I think we've done a pretty good job of.
Absolutely. And great job explaining and walking us through that. So that makes a ton of sense, everything that you described. So kind of another hot button issue that kind of pops up as well from time to time. Usually it's right after football playoffs. Sometimes it's after basketball, playoffs as well, is the idea of separating public and private schools. And I think there are some states that already have the separation. Others do not and operate just like us. Can you just talk a little bit about, as that conversation pops up, what are things that people maybe aren't considering? Is it as simple as people would like it to seem to be? Just, again, kind of behind the scene kind of look into how those discussions go from the MHSAA perspective.
So really good question. So we're a diverse membership. We've got 754 high schools, all kinds of schools in Michigan, traditional public schools, of which we're about 76% of those. And then we've got another group of our non-public schools, of which we've got about 110 of our non-public schools. And then we also now have nearing 100 some public charter schools. So that's kind of our three big groups. Now, whenever there's criticism about separating, what's a little bit ironic to me, Ryan, is you always hear those after a public school loses. There's 110 non-public schools, and some of those public schools that have voiced the concern the loudest, you go back and look at their schedule, they play non-public schools all the time. They have non-public schools in their league that they perennially have success with. But yet when they, again, when the season ends in the postseason, that's when you hear some of those concerns. And the other thing I'll also push back on a little bit is I do think there's some real cherry picking. All 8 of our bowling champions this year were 8 public schools. That has been the case for years. In softball, we have not had a non-public school even reach our championship game over the last 6 seasons since COVID. And so again, when you've got the non-publics who do a little bit better in football or basketball, what you're really trying to do with school people is say, okay, what does the data tell us? And so if we're 76% traditional public high schools, well, over the last 5 years, all of our MHSAA championships statewide have been about 71.5% won by traditional public schools. Well, in the perfect world, I'd like those numbers to be identical. 76% of your membership are public schools. You'd love for that championship number to be there, but it's close. It's certainly, I don't believe the data suggests of separation. When you then take it the next step out and say, okay, what kind of schools are reaching the championship game, or in an individual sport, what kind of schools are finishing in the top 5? Well, that number now moves to like 74% of those schools are traditional public high schools. So for some to suggest that the data, when you look at all sports, again, not cherry picking sport by sport, but when you look at all of our tournament sports all the way across the board, the numbers are actually a lot closer than I think most people in the general public would guess. There are many states that have had separate organizations, not just for years, but for generations. In this legal and litigious landscape that we live today, if there are people out there that think if we now separate our tournaments by public and non-public schools, my oldest son is in his last year of law school, and we've had this conversation. He laughs. He's like, Dad, that's the most basic definition of what discrimination would be. And so if people think that practically or legally that just we're going to snap our fingers and have separate tournaments, I don't think there's any way that would go in a court. I guarantee you somebody would bring action to that. Now, where I do think there are some fair questions, it's as you move in our smaller divisions. So in divisions 1 and 2, our public schools do as well as the 76%, if not better. Where that gap begins to widen a little bit is when you get down into the smaller school divisions, Division 3 and Division 4. That's something we actually talked a lot about. We brought a task force together to talk about adding potentially a 5th division in some sports. And while there was some excitement and some intrigue in that, there was also some, hey, we need to get more data, because what you don't want to have happen is if you now have 5 divisions of basketball and now it's divisions 3, 4, and 5, what you've now done is you've now created more opportunities, and the non-public schools are doing even better than they currently are, because again, in the smaller divisions, that's where those schools have had over the long term some better success. So when our council meets in May, there's actually a proposal from our classification committee that we're going to kind of form a standing committee, and their first goal and first task is to collect all of the data. So in other words, I just don't want to know in basketball what our breakdown is of public and non-public. I want to know in Division 1, what's the public, non-public breakdown of schools. I want to know what's the public and non-public breakdown at the district level, at the regional level. Because if we are going to make some decisions down the road, and by the way, separating by public and non-public, as I said, I believe is a political and especially a legal non-starter. But would there be a way that those schools that have sustained success treating public and non-public schools the same, is would you then look at enrollment where you then put in some kind of a success factor. So those uber successful schools year after year after year in say Division 3, could that potentially now move them up to Division 2, creating more balance and competitive equity in Division 3 at the smaller school level? But I think to really do that thoughtfully, you have to have data. You have to have not just data by sport, but you've got to do it by division. And you know what? And it's not just state championships. You've also got to look at which schools are winning at the district level, regional level. And I think once we get all that comprehensive data together, now I think you get some smart people in the room who can look at that, and we'll have a thoughtful conversation moving forward. But again, of the 110 or so non-public schools we have around, there's going to be blunt. Our public schools would play 80 plus of those schools every single day and not think twice.
Yep.
So it's not public-private. There's a group of those non-public schools that have had success over the years, those traditional type schools, where again, there's no surprise here that Lumen Christi is good in football. Spoiler alert.
Yep.
But you look at their roster today, and what you'll find is that a lot of these kids, dads also played on Lumen Christi football teams 25 years ago. And then if you go back another 25 years ago, you're going to see a lot of grandfathers. So the whole, well, so I think a handful of schools tend to be a lightning rod for that argument. But again, when you really drill down and look at the data and who you're playing in the regular season, I do think that there's some selective times where those concerns get raised. So if we're going to really have a thoughtful conversation about this issue, we've got to start with really, really good data. And that's what we're going to do here over the next 12 months or so.
That's a great way to phrase it as well, because like you said, it just rears its head at different times, depending, right, when the argument is in that person's favor, right? And so, and I think you made a good point about just how much work behind the scenes. If you're talking about doing this for just certain sports versus across the board, right? That's a layer of complexity. If you're looking at, as you mentioned, moving people up and down based on success, I mean, that's got to be every season, every year. That's a whole nother major lift behind the scenes that people have to figure. It's not this magic wand, snap your fingers. Oh, we just drew a new line in the sand, right? There's a lot of thought and work that goes into those types of changes if they come.
There is, and there's a lot of inaccuracy in this. We had a coach who, made some criticism fairly public about, non-public schools. And I'm not sure he quite realized that this was after a game where he got beat by a public charter school. And so, it's just like, come on. I mean, do your basic homework here. But anyway, like I said, this conversation will be data driven, and we look forward to really getting our arms around it in every sport at every level. And this needs to be a thoughtful conversation and process.
Absolutely. Well, I'll switch gears to something a little more kind of uplifting to talk about. We just had the Olympics pass, and Michigan seemed to be really excited because both through men's and women's, for example, hockey, which won gold, there was a lot of former Michigan student athletes on those teams and getting a lot of praise. And so I'm just curious, like when you see athletes that get to compete on a national level like that were MHSAA athletes at one time, what does it just say to you about the strength of high school athletics and student athletes in our state?
I think Michigan's a wonderful place, and not only it's kids that have grown up and come through our system here in Michigan, but we've really become now a hotbed for training. The hockey players you mentioned, many of those kids grew up, and then even the kids who weren't Michigan natives probably spent some time in the Ann Arbor or Plymouth area, because the USA Hockey Training Center on both the men's and women's side, that's where our national teams, when those kids are in their teenage years, that's where they now work out of. For a lot of years, and it gets shrunk a little bit, but they're still up there. In Marquette, Michigan is one of the United States Olympic training centers. And so we've really had some unique connections to the Olympics. It's not just kids from Florida and California and Texas. And again, I really think the success we had on both the men's and women's side this year in hockey with all of the Michigan connections was just beyond cool. And, there's Michigan connections everywhere. We're talking on March 10th. The Los Angeles Marathon was this past weekend, and winning in a photo finish was the track and field and cross country coach at Jackson High School. So just yet
Awesome.
another little Michigan
Yeah.
story of, everybody connected to school sports, whether it's students or in this case, even our coaches really are doing some neat things on both the national and international stages, and that's great.
Absolutely. Well, I know I got to get you out of here. I would just like to ask you one final question, Mark. We've been able to have these conversations on the podcast for a couple years now. And I'm hoping that I think our listeners find it valuable. I hope you find it valuable to be able to kind of share what's going on at MHSAA. What are you hoping really that people who are listening and taking the time to get these updates, principals, assistant principals, building and district admin, what are you hoping they get to understand about, MHSAA and the work that their athletic directors are doing and maybe the importance of scholastic sports?
So I think that, school sports are really the front porch to many of our schools. It's the reason why we get so many parents on our campuses. It's the reason we get so many visitors inside of our schools. And I really think that athletics can be a way where each of our member schools really tells their story, who they are, what they're about, and why the work that they're doing is so vitally important. I think it's also important for our school leaders, especially those that aren't engaged in athletics every single day, know that the MHSAA is a membership-driven organization. When schools join us each summer, it's completely free. It's a voluntary endeavor, and that if your school voluntarily joins the MHSAA each school year, you agree to follow the rules. And if there are rules or regulations that provide schools with heartburn or concerns, please contact us because, again, we've got a process in place where our members can put together and put forward proposals, ideas, concepts that we'll then take out to the entire membership, get feedback, and see where we're going to go. This is not a staff-driven organization. It's not even a board-driven organization. It needs to be a membership-driven organization, and that's not just our athletic directors, but we've got to hear from our principals and our superintendents. So just a very quick example. So you talk about NIL. Well, at the college level, NIL and the transfer portal is really now what drives college athletics. Ryan, when's the last time you heard of a college athlete as they now bounce from school to school to school to school are academically ineligible? I would argue that's probably never, because at the college level, we have completely discarded any kind of an academic focus or mission. Here at the high school level, every time we talk, it's still student athlete. That in order to be a high school athlete, you have to first meet the minimum standards as a student in terms of enrollment and passing enough classes. And in some districts, it's a minimum GPA. And we can't lose sight of that. So we get some pressure of, well, you should have a free transfer rule just like at the college level. And I think the very first question out of all of us needs to be, well, what would that look like in terms of academics? Getting an at-risk student or a student who struggles in school, do we really think that getting him or her to graduate, being at 3 different high schools over their 4 years, is going to help that or hurt that? And so I really think that, in these days where all of us in leadership, especially when it comes to kids, and families, hearing no is really, really difficult in this day and age.
Yep.
But there are certain standards and beliefs that I think we need to stick to. And at least at the high school level in Michigan, our kids are student athletes first and foremost. And I don't think that we can forget that academic responsibility and obligation that we really have to young people in our state. And that's why the MHSAA and MASSP, anytime that we can work together on different things, including, this podcast and, been able to have a presence at some MASSP meetings.
Yep.
We really need to be connected on a lot of issues because they really affect both groups equally. And that's why I'm always appreciative of your time, Ryan, and look forward to our next visit.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get you out of here. Good luck with the spring season, and hopefully we'll check in again at some point next year.
Sounds great. Thanks.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the MASSP podcast. Remember, you can listen to this podcast and others anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Just search for MASSP or hit the subscribe button right now.